I'm not one who reads the newspaper or watches the news as a rule. About, I don't know how many years ago, it occurred to me that it just frustrated me and made me upset. So I just stopped. It was an experiment. And it was a delightful experiment that I've never looked back on. I've found that thoughts are universal, and anything that I need to know seems to permeate the atmosphere, and somebody tells me, it pops up on the corner of my computer screen, or someone brings the subject up. I have a young nephew who's quite well informed, and so I let him give me tutorials whenever I hear something that seems intriguing to me. But even with the extremely peripheral involvement that I have with the planet, it's hard to have an even mind these days about what's going on. After many years' hiatus, Ananda has started taking groups of pilgrims to Israel again. And just at the last cycle of escalation of violence there, we had a group. Kamala from here was there and others from Europe. And so at the same time that there were all those pictures of exploding bombs, I was receiving letters of tremendous inspiration going from site to site. And also the commentary, which is not unusual, that what you see on the news is a little tiny slice of what's actually happening, because those make the best pictures. And in fact, our friend said that it was absolutely normal life the whole time that they were there. There was no sign of any shift of energy. I remember in 1989 when we had the Loma Prieta earthquake here, and very dramatically a piece of the Bay Bridge collapsed. And everywhere in the world, and all your friends in other parts of the country just assumed our houses were crushed and we were all living on the sidewalks, because over and over again you watch that one piece of dramatic footage. And the reason you watch that is because there wasn't a lot else. So that's the picture we get, which is very, very confusing. At the same time, anybody who knows about the Mideast, to name just one random place in the world where people are doing utterly unreasonable things and they cannot seem to extricate themselves from it. You can mention the Ukraine, and, well, God knows. And I mean, literally, God knows all that's going on the planet now. You can't help but feel a little uneasy. Then it comes really close to home in an absolutely ridiculous way by comparison, which is that we have this favorite little produce shop at the corner of San Antonio and California. It's called the Milk Pail, and they're gentrifying the whole area. Anything that, I don't know how they define it, but everything is being torn down and being rebuilt to densify and gentrify, make it all just more expensive. So this little business, which has been a fabulous business, the only objection anybody has to it is it's so busy nobody goes there anymore, as Yogi Berra said about some restaurant. Anyway, it's a fabulous place. It's been a private business, a little business for 3 generations. Now everything's being built up around it. The politics are just not worth saying. But the government requires 11 dedicated parking places, and the people who are developing 50 acres don't want to give them 11 parking places. They want them to go out of business. So there's a big hoo-ha, and everybody goes to the city council, and in the moment, the developer is a nice guy, and he says, okay, I'll give you the 11 parking places. But there's no jeopardy, there's no leverage. He already has his permits. So as soon as the hoo-ha dies down, he just takes it back. I mean, just greed, colossal greed, disregard for the human element, thinking I can just get whatever I want and I have no value but money. Money, 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 that's it. And, I'm a smart guy because, look, I can do that. The housing in this area is being now run by the companies that want more employees, that want more housing, hundreds more cars pouring out onto the same street, quality of life, future of the area, planning, forget it all. So, welcome to Ananda Church. Let's go out and have bagels. Joy is within you. I mean, where do you go with all of this? Because there's 2 ways we can go, and one of the ways is the way many churches and spiritual groups do go, where you become political. You sort of can't help yourself. priests, Catholic priests, become political in countries where they can't help themselves. They have to become political. They feel they have to become political because it's irresistible. You're looking at what you consider to be just absolute folly. But there's also this other reality that comes to us, and many of us, before we come to this way of life, went through that way of life. I was told once by a psychic, whether true or apocryphal, I don't know, but it fits. She said, and these were exact words, with the gift of gab that I seem to have, I helped start the French Revolution. Whether I did or not, I don't know. I definitely feel the reason I have to talk so much about self-realization now is because I spent a lot of lifetimes persuading people about other things, including, pick up your swords and attack the enemy, and various other things that did not work out so well for everyone. And the reason a person like me now decides I don't think I'll read the newspapers anymore is not in any way out of callous indifference to the almost unbearable abuse that we see going on around us. Not at all. But there is a point of transition for personal sanity, and I actually think for the evolution of consciousness, which is really not about, I don't like what they're doing, I want them to be different. There's a peculiar factor here that just has to be understood. It was in our reading today, the very last part. How can you tell? We're talking about a guru. How can you tell if you are in the company of one whose wisdom is worth following? And then there's a description about his equal regard for everyone, for the good and for the bad, for his friends and for his enemies. He sees them all the same. It's a very challenging idea and a little confusing even when we think about why can't they give the milk pail 11 parking places? Why can't they stop bombing? Why can't they stop these wars? How can all these realities be equal? And what I'm saying today is not an easy teaching. For those of you who just walked in, it's your karma to be here, so here we are. This is what we're going to be talking about. This is what we are talking about today. Swami Kriyananda was faced with a very profound personal challenge that actually embraced the entire community of Ananda when another religious organization decided that they should have a monopoly right on these teachings, and they tried to use their superior wealth and precedence in time to wipe us off the map, to take away our right to be who we are. And we went through 12 years of litigation, and it was not pretty. And because their position was not either legally or, in my opinion, morally or spiritually sound, they made use of less than ethical attorneys in order to win it. I'm being delicate. Less than ethical. When you get into the law courts, that's really impressive. So we were, we won where it mattered, we lost where it didn't matter, is the way I would put it. And at certain points, we were really being attacked in ways that were amazingly dishonorable, just stunningly dishonorable. When you're an honorable person, part of what happens to you is you spend half the process waiting for these people to grow up. I mean, what is wrong with you? Don't you understand karma? Not even the least bit of karma? In our community of Ananda, in Ananda Village, the families, well, in all of our Ananda communities, people are kind. Parents love their children. There's a certain goodness about life. And one of the little girls who'd been born and raised in our community at Ananda Village went to town with her mother. And they were in a store, and the child was about 4 at the time. And some mother and child were having an altercation in which the mother became enraged. And then the little child turned to her mother and says, "Mommy, why is that mommy behaving so badly?" She just couldn't comprehend. Why is that mommy behaving so badly? That's not how mommies behave. What do you say? Now, Swamiji was caught in this situation where very dishonorable people at that time essentially had power over him. And his faith, was tested for a 24-hour period. And he was meditating very deeply. He happened to be in our house, and the atmosphere of the house went very, very solemn, just exceedingly solemn. And Swamiji told us later that he prayed to Babaji, the Maha-avatar who guides our work, whose picture is at the top there for those of you who are new. And he said, I don't mind. I do everything for God. If you want to destroy my whole life's work, I did it for you. I didn't do it for myself. But why have you let these dishonorable people have power? And the answer he received from Babaji, just as clear as light, was, they are all my children. Now think about that in terms of our own evolution. I mean, do we think that we have never been dishonorable? Do we think that we accomplished, we arrived at this point of at least wanting to know God effortlessly without ever falling into any pits of delusion? Do you think that slang expression, been there, done that, applies to us? I at least have had dreams and occasional psychic readings and some pretty strong intuitions that I believe of some past lives that weren't all that pretty, in which, for whatever reason, the evolution of my particular soul had to go through stages of darkness. How do we ever come to understand anything? It's because we experience something that teaches us. What makes me so horrified when I see those people making terrible choices that will have terrible karmic consequences for them, when I was just thinking about the 3 generations that have been running the milk pail suddenly being put out of business, and your heart just hurts, because these are human stories of good people who will now be hurt. And I think of those greedy people who can't help them, but I think, don't worry, Asha, karma always balances out in the end. And I think, here am I, so convinced that this is not the right thing to do. How did I learn that? How did you learn it? Master says to us, every delusory action that we are no longer attracted to doing, we are not attracted because we have tried it, we have tested it, we have found out the consequences, and from our own experience, we are no longer drawn to it. He gave that as an absolutely blanket, no exceptions. That means if you're not a murderer, if you're not a thief, if you're not a philanderer, if you're not an evil landlord, whatever it might be, the reason you're not drawn is because you tried it and it didn't work. Karmic consequences of it. You can see that in tiny ways in this incarnation. And the masters tell us you can extrapolate from that. So, when evil people are doing hurtful things to others, it is God loving them and giving them the chance to find out. And when seemingly innocent people are the victim of evil people, it's God loving them and letting them find out some, not always obvious, something necessary that they have to learn, not for their suffering, but from their liberation from all suffering. In this reading, when it says, how can you tell who is worthy to follow because this is the consciousness he has? How do you think that equality of consciousness, that understanding of God's presence everywhere, do you think we accomplish that without challenge? Do you think we read one book and it says, oh yes, now I love my enemies as much as I love my friends? Now nothing can upset my equanimity? Of course not. We win that moment by moment, incarnation after incarnation, step by step. So what do righteous people do, though, when we find ourselves living on a planet where demons have sway. That's the only way you can feel about it. God, why do so many unrighteous people have power? Well, it's their turn. They have to learn. This is a planet designed for all these different levels of consciousness to interact. We are in an upward swing, according to the way the masters describe it. We're going into a higher age, but we're not there yet. I was thinking about that book, which I haven't read but only heard about, which my Irish friends remind me of periodically, How the Irish Saved Civilization, which, as I understand the theme of that book, is very simply when the planet Earth went through an even darker period than this, which was the nadir of low consciousness on this planet, and barbarians literally just swept over every civilized area and burned libraries and destroyed everything, that deep in these monasteries, there were bands of people who were holding on, at that time Christianity, to a certain divine consciousness, and they held the light of civilization until it was time again for that to come forward. Now, I was listening to Swami Kriyananda this morning, and he was actually talking on the subject in a recorded talk from a few years ago about the need for a guru. And he made this statement. He said, civilization in many ways is cracking all around us. He said, but small communities, small intentional communities of spiritually minded people will hold those values. And as Swami has often described it, when the cataclysmic forces, and in this case he was giving a very political talk, greed leads to depression, depression leads to social unrest leads to war, war in our particular time will lead to nuclear will lead to destruction, and then the light will be held by those who hold it now. Now, coming back to all of this, I'm coming to Sunday service this morning, turning the corner and seeing the 400 new apartments that are being built on the corner and wondering how long it'll take us to get to church when all those 400 cars start pouring out. Although probably on Sunday mornings, they probably won't be coming to church, so it won't be a problem. How long it'll take us to get to the grocery store or whatever it is, whatever it might be. And I'm thinking about Hamas, and I'm thinking about the Jews in Israel, and I'm thinking about the milk pail. What do I do with all of this? Oh yeah, I remember. God is in charge. They're all my children. And I remember the paragraph in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda's seminal work. He describes Babaji and Christ and his own mission, and he talks about the masters who are very concerned, who are aware of the unfortunate direction of modern civilization, which they described as war, suicidal war, race hatred, religious sectarianism, and the boomerang evils of excessive materialism. They're aware of it, and they're working on it. And how are they working on it? This is how they're working on it. Because this is the power, this is the light, this is the clarity of understanding. Yes, God is in charge. And people are trying to go there, but the first step they're going there is, my values are better than yours, so you better do what I want. Which is good if the values they're asserting are your values. That looks good to you, doesn't it? You get down into the heart of the Mideast, and it's easy to blame a whole lot of different people, but you sort of get down in the heart of it, and you find individuals on all sides of these questions who fiercely believe that they're doing what they ought to be doing. And if you just keep having all these egoic desires banging against each other, that is the problem. Of course, I think there are gradations of evil, misunderstanding among those egos bashing against each other, but that is the essential problem. And it's really a little better, but not a lot better, to find out ways to assert my ego over yours. Because sooner or later that ego will shift into power, and then you'll be starting again. When we were at Ananda village many, many years ago, I worked for 18 months on this project, a political project. Ananda village now it has 1,000 acres of land, and the land is under the jurisdiction of the Board of Supervisors of the county, and it's been very difficult to do land planning in that setting. So we decided that we would make a run for freedom. This was 1980. And the only government entity applicable to us that has land use planning freedom is a municipality. So I worked for 18 months to try to make Ananda a city. Okay? You know, actually I'm slipping, I've got this wrong here, but we didn't succeed. We were robbed. We were going to go into the courts and try to get it through the courts. And Swamiji decided, absolutely not, we're not going to do this. Because he said, we were constituted for a spiritual purpose. And when something constituted for a spiritual purpose takes that power that they've generated as a spiritual entity and then applies it in another arena, he said it's just going to go down a trail that we don't want to go. And so he stopped. Earlier on, when I was also in another political activist position there, which I had apparently intermittently, we were successful in our effort at that time, also having to do with land use planning, and then there was this little movement to run me for county supervisor. You know, it's just a tiny little, as Swami called it, it's a tempest in a teapot. It's just this tiny little rural place. It was quite probable that I could have won. And it was like, do we want somebody in Ananda to be, you know, a county supervisor? And it was like, I sort of go to Swami like, I feel like I'm going to my doom. Oh, sir, do I have to run for county supervisor now? No, it's just like, I'll die of boredom if I have to sit in those meetings. And he said, no, we're not here for that kind of power. Just as simple as that. That's not the kind of power that we're looking for. See, many, many religious groups, we see it all over our country, they just slip right into that. They start out spiritual, they start out depending on God, they start out working for God, and then they slip back into ego against ego. Now, I'm not criticizing everyone who does that, because every soul has to move according to what they're ready to learn right now. And what are we ready to learn right now? And what is our message? Our message is very simple. God is in charge. And the power of spirit trumps all other powers. No, not immediately. And that was the confusion that Judas felt with Jesus. He thought Jesus was going to declare himself as the king of the Jews, and instead he allowed himself to be crucified. Judas was very confused, so confused that he committed suicide, because that was not what he intended. He intended to force Jesus to show his power. But Judas had lost contact at that point with what that power was. Never underestimate the power of the Spirit, because after they all blow themselves to bits, the Spirit is still there. After the barbarians swept through and did away with everything, those who had devoted themselves to God were still there. And the only influence, truly, the only lasting influence, both for ourselves and for the 3 generations of people who own the milk pail, really, is to be true to the highest that we understand. To really feel the presence of the masters, to believe what they say, and then to give our hearts completely to it. And I'm not talking, this is not a cop-out. This is not like a passive, oh, now I believe in God. I don't have to even think about, I don't have to do anything else. Oh, the responsibility is infinitely larger now. Because this is a war of magnetism. This is a war of vibrations. And what is really ruling is the thoughts and the hearts and the understanding of life. You know, how much influence can we have in our way? It's entirely dependent on every individual. Even though I'm not registered to vote and seldom vote and don't read the newspapers, I consider myself to be a powerful political activist. I'm working every day, every time I do my kriyas, every time I pray for someone, every time I overcome my own fear and my own anxiety and my own heartache with the realization that God is in charge. And the masters know that this is happening. And the life we are living is the answer, if we truly live it. If we ourselves resist the desire to be fearful, to be angry, to fall into despair, to not behave as the description of a true master is, to love all equally. That does not mean that you treat all equally. Bear that in mind, because the karmic law must be fulfilled. And if someone is behaving in a way and the response to that is not gentle, that is not outside of God's will. Look at Jesus. He picked up a whip and drove the money changers out of the temple. Paramhansa Yogananda was very powerful when he needed to be powerful. Swami Kriyananda was absolutely unrelenting when principles were at stake. Through the years of the persecution that we saw, he was absolutely unrelenting. He never compromised, never. Why would he? Once you do that, you've lost everything. You have absolutely nothing at that point. Because all we ever have in this, you see, is our consciousness. And life comes and life goes. With us, the span of this lifetime is very, very short. And when our bodies pass away, whether we live a natural span and die comfortably in our beds at the age of 90, or whether, in fact, some of the cataclysmic events that have been predicted take place, and as Swami said, we all go out together in one big flash. Once we're in the astral worlds, all we have is our consciousness. That's all we ever have. And this poor, greedy developer who can't spare 11 parking places for this family business, it'll catch up with him, because all he'll have is his consciousness. When he wants mercy, he has created a universe in which mercy doesn't come to him. And then he'll learn from that, not because God is cruel, but just the opposite, because God loves everyone equally. And he lets all of us have the opportunity to learn. Isn't that the kindest thing? Isn't that the best thing a mother can do for her child? Is to help that child to have the experiences so he can learn. That's what our mother is doing for us, our divine mother. She's giving us exactly the experiences we need. I often say to my friends, this is early Dwapara Yuga. That's my mantra. This is the planetary age we're in. When I think it's just horrible here, I say to myself, early Dwapara, if you didn't want to experience this, you shouldn't have been incarnated now. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Now we're questioning it. But we have no one to blame. But actually, we do have someone to blame. We can blame Yogananda, because he decided to incarnate in this time, and Swami came with him, and then Swami dragged all of us. So we can blame them. But what a privilege, isn't it? Why would we want to be born where we can just settle down into a comfortable, nothing changes, generations stay the same, and everybody has their parking places? Where would the growth be for us? Where would the opportunity to face and overcome the fear? Where would our faith in God, how would we build it? We are exactly where we are meant to be, not only for our own soul expansion, but truly, well, I don't want to say how the self-realization has saved civilization. Let somebody else write that book generations from now. But how every devotee deepened their relationship with God. That's the individual memoir we all need to be writing. God bless you.